Helen Wilson had lived her whole life on the same stretch of land in rural Oregon. Her days were filled with the simple beauty of muddy boots, sunrise chores, and the hum of cattle in the early morning. At 24, she had never left the state, never flown in a plane, never even been on a proper date. She had never kissed a man, never needed to. Her heart had always belonged to dreams far quieter than the world offered. Fields, laughter, family dinners, and a love that would come when the time was right. But life had different plans. When her father collapsed one spring afternoon while fixing the tractor, Helen's world cracked. The hospital visits grew longer, the bills piled higher. The doctors spoke in whispers, avoiding eye contact. It was cancer, aggressive, expensive, and time was not on their side. One rainy evening, soaked from running errands, Helen opened her laptop at the kitchen table. A new message sat unread in her inbox. The sender's name made her chest tighten. Jackson Jordan. She knew the name well, not just from newspapers or tech headlines, but from a time long before his fame. Jackson had once been her cousin Daniel's best friend. They used to visit the farm together during summers. Jackson, with sharp blue eyes, quiet words, and a haunted look that no child should carry. After Daniel's death in a car accident 6 years ago, Jackson had vanished from her world. Until now. The email was short, strange. Helen, I'm offering you a proposal. Marry me. 1 year. No physical expectations. You will be well taken care of. Jackson. She blinked, reread it twice, then sat frozen. Was this a joke? A scam? But when she clicked the attachment, her breath caught in her throat. Legal documents. Real. Precise. Generous beyond imagination. He offered to pay for her father's entire treatment. He would pay off the farm's debts, and in return she would become Helen Jordan, his wife, for 1 year, with no intimacy, no obligations, just marriage. The next morning she called him. His voice on the other end was calm, but cold. I know this is strange, he said, but it's real. I need someone I can trust. And you were always good. Why me? She asked softly. I can't explain now, he answered, but you'll be safe. You'll have everything you need. The silence between them stretched long. It wasn't a romantic proposal. It wasn't even warm. But Helen looked out the window at her father, curled in a worn blanket on the porch, pale and thinner by the day, and said yes. 2 weeks later, she stood in a rose garden behind a glass mansion in Malibu, wearing a simple cream dress. There was no press, no guests, just them, a lawyer, and a breeze that smelled like salt water and secrets. Jackson looked handsome but unreadable. In a tailored black suit, his jaw tight, he barely looked into her eyes as he said the vows. He didn't hold her hand for long. Didn't kiss her lips, just brushed her cheek with his fingers like she might shatter. After the ceremony, he left her alone in a wing of the house larger than her entire farm back home. A note on her pillow read, "Thank you. Your room is yours. You don't owe me anything." Each day, Jackson disappeared into work. He was always dressed sharp, speaking on secure calls, and surrounded by assistants who barely nodded at her. And yet, something about him haunted her. Something broken behind the walls he'd built. At night, she sat by her window, looking out at the ocean, wondering who he truly was. Wondering why a man like Jackson Jordan, billionaire, genius, powerful, would want a girl like her, untouched and unknown. Why offer marriage but no touch? Why hide pain behind polished perfection? Helen didn't know the answers yet. But her heart told her one thing. Beneath the cold deal and the silent mansion, a secret was waiting. Something tragic, something human. And one day, the truth would change everything. The mansion rose like a monument of silence above the roaring ocean, its walls all glass and steel, its edges sharp against the soft skies of Malibu. Helen had never seen anything like it. It felt less like a home and more like a beautiful cage, vast, modern, and strangely empty. The day she moved in, a maid quietly handed her a master key card and disappeared without a word. No one greeted her. No one smiled. The staff moved like ghosts, efficient, polite, and always avoiding eye contact. Even the walls seemed to echo with absence. It was as if joy had been banned from this place long ago. Jackson's wing was on the east side, hers, the west. There was a library between them, rows of untouched books, their spines still stiff, their pages unbent. Helen walked it alone every night, trying to find meaning in the silence. Jackson Jordan, her new husband, was a mystery wrapped in Armani. He left early every morning, returning only after dark. He ate dinner alone in his office, never asked her to join, never invited her in. She watched him from afar, how his shoulders stayed tight with tension, how he spoke to others with clinical calm, how his eyes stayed fixed on his phone even during sunsets that painted the sky in gold. The only time he looked up was when he thought she wasn't watching. But Helen noticed everything. He never raised his voice, never touched her, never even brushed her arm in passing. Yet, in moments too small to stage, he betrayed himself. A cup of tea left outside her door, always exactly how she liked it. A new sweater folded neatly at the end of her bed when the nights turned cold. Soft jazz playing near the garden when she wandered there one morning barefoot. Still, he never stayed. One night, unable to sleep, Helen tiptoed out of her room and saw it. Jackson standing in the hallway outside her door. He didn't see her. His hand hovered near the doorknob, like he wanted to open it, like he wanted to check on her. Then slowly he backed away and disappeared into the dark. Her chest ached with a feeling she didn't fully understand. Pity, curiosity, maybe something more. The next day, she wandered into a studio behind the garage. It smelled like old paint and dust. On the far wall was a canvas, draped with cloth. Something pulled at her, instinct maybe, or the quiet hum of fate. She lifted the sheet. Her breath caught. It was her. Drawn in oil and charcoal, not as she was now, but as she had been at 16, in a summer dress, hair braided, laughing beside the old barn. He had painted her from memory. Helen felt her knees weaken. The detail, the emotion in every line. It wasn't just art, it was devotion. But why? Later that evening, the sky turned violent. Rain slapped against the windows, thunder rolling like drums of war. Helen found him standing by the tall glass panels of the living room, watching the storm. "Why me?" she asked softly. Jackson didn't turn. He spoke without emotion. "Because you're safe." She frowned. Safe from what? "From wanting things I can't give." She stepped closer. "You think I don't want anything from you?" He still didn't look at her. "You don't want me. That's what makes this work." Helen's voice trembled. "You think I don't want to be loved?" That made him look at her. Really look. For the first time, his mask cracked. "I'm not lovable," he said. "Not the way people want. I'm broken, Helen. You deserve better than what's left of me." Her heart squeezed. She saw it then. Not just the sadness in him, but the fear. Fear of being touched, seen, truly known. Fear that if anyone got too close, they'd run. But she didn't run. She whispered, "Then let me see you, all of you." He shook his head slowly, backing away into the shadows, as if terrified of the light she carried. In the days that followed, the mansion didn't feel colder, but he did. More distant, more guarded. But Helen was no longer afraid of the silence. Because now she knew, behind every closed door in this mansion, there was a heart begging to be let out. And she wasn't giving up. 3 months had passed since the silent wedding in the rose garden, yet Helen still felt like a stranger in Jackson's life. The mansion remained hushed. Their routine became mechanical. Polite good mornings, occasional shared meals, long silences filled with everything unsaid. But inside her, something had changed. Each time she heard his footsteps, her pulse quickened. Every time he brushed past her, even accidentally, her skin burned with longing. She didn't understand it fully. How a man who barely touched her could make her heart ache like this. But it wasn't about desire alone. She had fallen for the man behind the cold expression, the one who left tea outside her door, who stood watch while she slept, who captured her soul on canvas before they ever reunited. The man who was hurting more deeply than he let anyone see. And tonight she couldn't hold it in anymore. The storm had passed. Moonlight painted silver shadows across the marble floors. Helen stood in front of her mirror, her fingers trembling as she slipped into a soft ivory nightgown. It wasn't about seduction. It was about truth, about connection. She crossed the long hallway toward his room. The oak door loomed tall and unwelcoming, but she knocked anyway. Once, twice. No answer. She slowly turned the handle. Inside, Jackson stood by the window in his usual midnight black shirt, back turned, shoulders tense. "Jackson?" she whispered. He turned, startled. His eyes dropped to the silk of her gown, then snapped back up to her face, shocked, confused, uncertain. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice low. Helen took a deep breath. "I want to know you." Those 5 words cracked the silence like thunder. He backed away instantly, his jaw tightening. "Don't," he said. "Not like this." "I'm not trying to take anything from you," she said gently. "I'm offering something. Me. My trust." He closed his eyes and pressed his fists to his forehead like he was in pain. "I can't." His voice cracked. "I can't give you what you want." "I haven't asked for anything," she replied, her voice trembling. "I just want the truth." He looked at her then, and in his eyes for the first time she saw fear. "I'm impotent, Helen," he said barely above a whisper. "Since the crash, 5 years ago. That's why I married you. That's why I chose someone innocent. I thought you wouldn't expect more." Her heart dropped, but not because of what he said. It was how he said it, like a confession soaked in shame. He turned away again, whispering to the dark, "I'm not a man anymore. I can't give you a normal marriage. I thought I could keep it businesslike, keep it clean. But you're not cold, Helen. You're warm. Too warm. And I'm too broken." Tears welled in her eyes, not from disappointment but from compassion. She walked slowly across the room until she was standing in front of him. His body was rigid, breathing uneven. "You think this changes how I feel?" she said softly. "Jackson, love isn't just about what happens between the sheets." He laughed bitterly, head down. "That's easy to say when you don't know what it's like to be unwanted." Her hand reached up, gently cupping his cheek. "I want you, not your body. You. The man who takes care of everyone else but forgets himself. The boy who painted me from memory. The one who's been hurting in silence for years." He looked at her then, truly looked. His eyes were wet, his face pale. He had never looked so raw, or so real. "You would have still chosen me?" he whispered. She nodded, her voice cracking. 1,000 times over. Something inside him shattered. The years of pretending, of holding himself together with silence and shame. It all broke. And Jackson Jordan, billionaire, genius, recluse, collapsed into her arms, sobbing like a man finally set free. Helen held him, her silk gown soaked with his tears, her fingers running through his hair as she whispered, "You are not broken, you're just hurt, and I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since their wedding, they held each other through the night, not in passion, but in truth. And somehow, that was more intimate than anything either of them had ever known. As the weeks passed after that vulnerable night, something shifted between Helen and Jackson. The coldness between them thawed, little by little. He didn't vanish into silence anymore. He joined her for morning tea, sometimes sitting with her in the garden for hours, watching the sea without needing to fill the quiet. He even smiled, just once or twice, but when he did, it felt like sunrise breaking through years of darkness. Still, Helen sensed something deeper lingering beneath the surface, something unfinished. The way he flinched at loud voices, the way he ignored family-related questions, the way he tensed up when he saw children on the television. He shared pieces of himself, but not everything. And she loved him enough now to want everything. One cloudy afternoon, while Jackson was away at a shareholder meeting, Helen wandered into the locked study that had always been off-limits. But today, the door was slightly ajar, almost like he'd left it open, on purpose. The room smelled like old ink and cedar wood. Mahogany shelves lined the walls. Folders were stacked in neat rows. A filing cabinet sat in the corner, partially opened. She wasn't snooping, not out of mistrust, but out of love. She wanted to understand him. She needed to. What she found inside the cabinet shattered her. Photos. Dozens. Old, worn, black and white prints tucked into a leather folder marked Foster Records. One image showed Jackson as a child, no older than 6, with bruises on his arms and a blank stare that didn't belong to someone so young. Another showed a woman holding him, a woman with honey-brown skin, tired eyes, and a soft smile. The back read, "My Mama, 1989. Helen sat down slowly, piecing the story together through bits and pieces, clippings, letters, court documents. Jackson Jordan wasn't born into wealth. He was born Jackson Miles, son of a black single mother who had worked 3 jobs just to keep him clothed. His father had disappeared when Jackson was 4. No name listed, just a scribbled line. He was taken from his mother at age 7 when she was wrongfully arrested during a protest. She died in prison 2 years later. Jackson was thrown into foster care, bouncing from one bitter home to the next, never staying long enough to be loved. Because of his pale skin, many assumed he was white, but the world never let him forget where he came from. He was called a mistake, a ghost-colored mutt, too light to belong to the black kids, too dark in blood to belong to the white ones. He belonged nowhere. Helen's hands trembled as she read the psychiatric report from when he was 17. Words like emotionally detached, rage suppression, and chronic identity trauma were circled in red. And then she found the truth she wasn't prepared for. The car crash that had taken his ability to have children, it wasn't an accident. It was intentional. A suicide attempt. The report from the emergency room was clear. No skid marks, no signs of brake pressure. A 3:00 a.m. collision into a concrete barrier at full speed. He had wanted it all to end. Because even after he built his empire, became a billionaire before 30, and was called a genius by the media, he still felt like a mistake. Still unloved, still unworthy. Helen sat there for hours, tears running silently down her face. This man who lived in a glass palace had spent his life walking barefoot over shards of memory. He had survived not because he wanted to, but because something, somewhere, had refused to let him die. Maybe that something had been her. That night, when Jackson returned, she met him at the door. Her eyes were still red from crying, but her voice was steady. "I know," she whispered. He froze. "Know what?" She stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his chest. "Everything. The foster homes. Your mom. The crash." He staggered back a step, his walls rushing back like shields of steel. "You went through my files?" "I walked through your pain," she said softly, "because I love you, and I needed to see what you've been hiding in the dark." He turned away, jaw clenched, fists shaking. "Now you understand why I'm not meant to be loved." She came behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist, her voice trembling but fierce. "No," she whispered. "Now I understand why you need it more than anyone." He collapsed into her embrace, silent, trembling, broken in her arms once again. But this time, she knew. She wasn't holding a shattered man. She was holding a survivor. And finally, she understood. Jackson didn't need fixing. He needed someone who saw his scars and still stayed. And Helen had no intention of going anywhere. Healing didn't happen in grand moments. It happened in the softest ways, like drops of rain filling a once-empty well. After the night Jackson let himself cry in Helen's arms, something shifted. Not suddenly, but gently, like the first warmth after a long winter. He began to linger, not just in rooms, but in her presence. He brought her breakfast one morning, not ordered from the chef, but made by his own hands. The eggs were burnt and the toast was too dry, but Helen ate every bite with a smile that made him blush like a teenager. They started walking together, barefoot along the private beach behind the mansion. Sometimes they didn't speak at all, just listened to the waves and the wind, letting the silence feel sacred instead of sad. Helen would slip her hand into his, and though his fingers were hesitant at first, they soon curled around hers like they belonged there all along. At night, they stayed up talking until 2 a.m., sometimes lying on the couch like teenagers, heads touching, hearts open. Jackson told her stories he'd never told anyone, about his mother's lullabies, about the dog he once rescued as a kid, about the night he almost didn't make it through. Helen didn't flinch, she just listened. And in return, she shared her own fears. The guilt of leaving the farm behind, the grief of watching her father fade, the secret ache of never being kissed until marriage. Jackson kissed her then. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't fire. It was soft and sacred and safe. And it meant everything. They danced barefoot in the kitchen one rainy night, music playing from a dusty old record player Jackson had kept hidden for years. Helen spun in her oversized t-shirt, laughing as Jackson tried to follow her lead with awkward, charming grace. When he laughed, truly laughed, it sounded like the walls of the house sighed in relief. He laughed more often now. The staff started smiling too. The mansion no longer echoed with cold. It breathed. It lived. Because love had moved in. Still, Jackson was afraid to hope too much. Afraid it would all vanish. Afraid Helen would wake up one day and realize he could never give her the fairy tale. No perfect family, no biological children, no perfect man. But Helen had never wanted perfect. She wanted true. One afternoon, she returned from the hospital, her father's treatment finally showing signs of hope, and found Jackson sitting in the garden with a sketch pad. He was drawing her again. She stood quietly behind him, holding a manila folder in her hands. "What are you working on?" she asked softly. He smiled up at her. "You." She handed him the folder. He opened it. Inside were adoption papers. He looked up stunned. "Helen! I don't want to build a family because we have to," she said gently. "I want to build one because we want to." He stared at the documents like they were written in another language. "You mean, you still want a family? With me?" "With you," she nodded. "Not just because you're capable, but because you're worthy. Of love, of laughter, of tiny footsteps running through this house." Tears welled in his eyes, the paper trembling in his hands. He whispered, "I'm not broken, am I?" She stepped forward, placed her hand over his heart. "No," she said, her voice full of truth. "You're beautifully whole, and now so am I." He closed the folder, pulled her into his arms, and held her like he never wanted to let go. And in that embrace, in the warmth of shared tears and steady heartbeats, a man who had once tried to die finally began to truly live. They didn't need sex to make their love real. They didn't need blood to make a family. They just needed each other. And love, real love, did the rest. A year had passed. 12 months since two strangers exchanged vows in silence. 12 months since a wounded man offered a contract and a tender soul said yes. But time, when wrapped in love, becomes a healer. The mansion no longer whispered sadness. It echoed with music and warmth. Laughter now filled the halls, the garden bloomed brighter, and Jackson Jordan, once known for being untouchable, had become something no one expected. Happy, Helen had brought light into a man who lived in shadow, not by fixing him, but by loving every broken piece until it no longer felt broken at all. And on the morning of their first anniversary, she woke to find a single red rose on her pillow, and a note in Jackson's handwriting. "Meet me in the garden at 6. Wear white. Just this once, let me give you the wedding you truly deserve." Her heart fluttered like it had wings. At sunset, she stepped into the same rose garden where they had first said, "I do," but this time, it was transformed. White and blush roses wrapped around wooden arches. Strings of golden lights twinkled overhead like stars. A soft quartet played in the background. Guests stood in awe, friends, staff, even former foster kids Jackson had quietly supported over the years. And there he was, Jackson Jordan, standing at the altar, dressed in a white suit, his eyes wet but glowing with peace. He looked at her like she was the beginning and end of every dream. "I wanted our first wedding to save your father," he whispered when she reached him. "This one is to save me." Tears rolled down Helen's cheeks as he knelt, not with a ring, but with his whole heart in his hands. "I married you because I needed safety," he said. "But I stayed because I found love. I stayed because you taught me that I'm not a mistake, that even broken people deserve to be chosen." She cupped his face, whispering through tears, "And I will choose you every day for the rest of my life." They said new vows, ones written not by lawyers but by love. This time, when Jackson kissed her, it wasn't hesitant or careful. It was full, real, free. A kiss of a man no longer running from his past, but stepping into his future. That night they returned to the mansion hand in hand, laughter still ringing in their ears. Candlelight flickered across their bedroom walls. The ocean breeze kissed the curtains as Helen turned to him. There was no fear, no shame, no need to hide. He touched her face reverently, like she was sacred, and she held him like she had always been waiting for this moment, not just of intimacy, but of union. When they made love, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, soul-deep, and beautiful. Jackson didn't just give her his body. He gave her his trust, his heart, his tears, his joy. And Helen gave him the only thing he'd never truly had, a home. They fell asleep wrapped in each other, not as billionaire and bride, not as wounded and healer, but as two hearts made whole. Their story became more than just a whispered fairy tale. It became a lesson, in towns, in headlines, in hearts across the country. That love is not always pretty. It's not perfect, but it is powerful. And in a world still too quick to judge by race, by labels, by bloodlines and bank accounts, Helen and Jackson proved that real love sees beyond scars, beyond secrets, beyond skin. It heals. It rebuilds. It chooses again and again. And on that second wedding night, the truth wasn't that a virgin married an impotent billionaire. It was that two souls, once lost, finally found their way home.